Hello and welcome to Ukraine Today's press review. I'm Rahim Rahimtullah. In today's program, we'll examine 3 articles from the international media. Our first piece comes from Darina Krasnoludska, writing in Bloomberg. She says Ukraine airport battle rages as conflict lurches toward war. The report comes in the context of a flurry of reports in recent days of intense fighting at the Donetsk airport in East Ukraine as Russian-backed insurgents redouble their efforts to dislodge Ukrainian government forces. A ceasefire signed back in September is apparently nowhere to be found. The upsurge in violence recalls the peak of the 9-month conflict, which has killed more than 4,800 people and poisoned Russia's ties with its former Cold War foes. Krasnoludska delves into the thorny issue of talks between the Kremlin and the West to bring an end to the conflict. There's been little optimism on that front in recent times. She quotes a European Union academic who says the separatist side and the people they talk to want to show that they can still have the upper hand on the battlefield. Every time they have the upper hand, the West is more willing to negotiate. We turn now to a report on Ukraine's economy, which appeared in The Economist, which says the country is on the edge of default if it doesn't get more help from the West. The newspaper quotes Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko, who said the conflict in East Ukraine is costing the country $10 million per day. Apart from that, the country's finances are also suffering from the crashing currency, the hryvnia. But The Economist says the West's reluctance to offer more money reflects mounting frustration over Ukraine's haphazard reform efforts. Financier George Soros has suggested the West should find $50 billion to give to Ukraine. The Economist thinks there's little chance of that happening, but says a Ukrainian collapse would prove Mr. Putin's contention that Western promises mean little and that change in the post-Soviet world leads only to pain. The West may soon have to decide, what is Ukraine worth? Finally, we'll go to Reuters for our last piece today, where Alistair MacDonald looks at what Europe is doing to try to defuse the Ukraine crisis. He says the EU may flirt with Moscow, but it is not yet set to yield. EU leaders will review sanctions on Russia in March. Ahead of that key date, EU Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini has released a paper offering Moscow some compromises if it is willing to step back on Ukraine. MacDonald says the paper tests the readiness of EU countries to shift the focus of the discussions towards possible political and economic re-engagement with Russia if it fulfills a Ukraine truce accord. But Mogherini's document has provoked some mixed reviews from EU members, all of whom have, of course, spoken anonymously. MacDonald reports his findings, saying one diplomat from a country strongly opposed to easing sanctions said Mogherini was pursuing a policy of setting Ukraine to one side to free EU states to pursue business and diplomatic advantages with Russia in other spheres. So where does all this leave us? On the ground, progress looks minimal as fighting has flared once again. Nonetheless, Ukraine is trying to push forward with reform, even as cash is in ever shorter supply. Europe and the West, meanwhile, appear to be on the fence, offering some money, but not the amount that Ukraine really needs to radically improve its economy. If Europe does look to re-engage with Russia in some spheres, that would be pushing the situation in Ukraine ever closer to a frozen conflict. That's all we have time for today. We won't be here over the weekend, but join us again on Monday for another press review. In Kiev, this is Ukraine Today.